I think humans, we like to test. No matter you give us something, and in this case, we basically want to build some wings and then try like flying in this case. Anyone knows who's the person described, drawn in the picture? I'm just going to give you a hint, maybe any Germans? Okay, so if you go to Berlin, I think the airport of Tegel is named after Otto Lilienthal. He was kind of like one of the pioneers of aviation, and his test flights were over 250 meters with kind of like these wings. And what is important wasn't like his successes, but mostly his legacy. He was basically very thoroughly tracking all these test flights, and actually these kind of like data became the base ground for the Wright brothers when they were designing the first human plane. So, like, even with failures, in this case, I'm not going to say what happened because it's very, well, actually, you can infer what happened to Otto. And, but even during the failures, like, the way you track your tests and the way you collect the data is super important. And more nowadays, in the era of data, where we have, like, supercomputers on very soon, maybe quantum computers that are analyzing this data and are reducing the cost of running this test. But when we ask developers, what is the goal of testing? Most of you actually told us that it's basically to take more informed decisions. And essentially what we want is get the user's input or the player's input and try to make our game much better. And we do that all across the funnel of players. We start from like the ads, creatives, where do we put the call to action, also with the assets, and then it goes all the way into the store listing, and once the player is in our game, where do they go? Like, do they see a different welcome first-time user experience, or they have maybe a different welcome pack? And we use, when we ask developers, you use a lot of methods. So some of the developers, you might use one-to-one or surveys in order to narrow the features that you're testing. The classic A/B test comes all the time. And some developers, more sophisticated, they might think about using multi-arm bandit, which assigns, that's kind of like the graph, assigns more traffic to the winning option, or Bayesian test, which are kind of like looking at the long term. But don't worry, this is not about statistics. We are not going to go in details in these methodologies. But we also see is that developers, they're facing some challenges. And most of the challenges are about like, well, I might spend a lot of time doing a test, and I'm at a point where I've been 4 months running this test, and in the case of this quote, and I don't know what to do. Should I keep testing, or should I cancel? And also, Hugh, who's here, was telling us that, for example, sometimes you have no conclusions because there's a lack of significance, or there's basically the sample or the data is not diverse enough. And sometimes as well, we have very good short-term results, but this leads to kind of like long-term bad outcomes, as in the case of SuperSolid was mentioning. So overall, when we ask developers, we kind of like identify different areas. We identify like challenges in different areas. The first one is about planning, like what type of features do we kind of like test? How do we think about like the hypotheses? As well, we saw that during the execution of those tests, like what methodology are we choosing to run these tests? How do we make sure that data is reliable, or the time that we're going to run this test for? And then when it comes to results, is also like, what do we do with noise, outliers? All of a sudden, I have a viral video just like started talking about my game, and I have these kind of like new traffic that is reacting in a different way. So to do that, let's go and deep dive into testing. And to deep dive, we have an expert in both deep diving in tests and free diving. Here's a picture. I just wanted to show the picture because I thought it was amazing. He was actually 50 meters below the sea level and holding his breath for over 3 minutes. Please don't try that now. And so with this, I would like to introduce to the stage our next speaker, Riku, CEO of Traplight.
All right, thank you guys. So, hello, I'm Riku. And besides being addicted to diving, I'm also addicted to games. I've been programming games for 20 years now and been working with mobile games for 10 years. So I'm a founder and the CEO of a company called Traplight Games. The company is almost 10 years old now, so we've seen quite a big shift from going from paid games to a full free-to-play economy. And of course, as Ignacio mentioned, testing is now easier and also more important than ever before. So today I've been talking about one of the cases, so one of the actual games that we've been building and prototyping. And this game actually through many iterations and tests was validated to be worth making, and we're actually currently going towards the global launch of the game. So our game is called Battle Legion. It's an async PvP spectator battle game. It has deep strategy element, but no player interaction required during the matches. And this is what separates it from most of the real-time PvP games. It also has a very unique, almost slot machine-like core interaction, where you can swipe the screen and find an opponent very easily. So with this game, we wanted to release very early on Google Open Beta and validate all the key features with testing, unlike we did with our first big free-to-play game. We chose similar cycle that Ignacio already mentioned, the one with planning and execution stages and then acting based on the results. So what was achieved on the first 8 months after starting the open beta? We increased D1 significantly, more than doubled our D3, and retained 4 times more users on D7. And overall, what we learned is that what features make the biggest impact on user engagement, especially on the early stages. So going back to the starting point, there's a few things you need besides, of course, exciting and fun game. One important thing is obviously some kind of UA creative once you start testing. We found out with multiple prototypes we built before this game that a simple 20-second video on the actual gameplay is the best one. It has good user quality and also gives you relatively low CPI. But of course, you also need the basic analytics in place and some usability tests done before that. After you have all the mentioned things ready, you need to plan your test. So the most important thing is to make sure your data is reliable. So how we approached it was to standardize all the test parameters. This is very important, especially on the targeting and on the creative, because even slight changes in the video or the targeting of your campaigns may affect your results significantly. So in our testing, we wanted to target similar games with similar fantasy and theme, but we also didn't want to spend huge amount of money on the tests. So that's why we chose a country like Brazil, which has a high amount of users, but they're also quite cheap. So we could acquire them actually with 25 cents per user. So we only spent like $500 per test, acquiring sometimes even thousands of users at a time. Another important thing is how to structure a testing cycle. So more importantly, what features to test and how much you predict that the impact will be. So we had this cycle of always releasing a build to open beta, then setting KPI targets around what we wanted to test. So in the early stage, we wanted to, of course, improve D1 and D3. So we usually build features that targeted those and then validated the results with the testing. And now breaking it down, the 8 months of development. We started with very bare bones prototype that had quite promising D1. Already in the first steps, we could get to over 40% D1, but then it tapered down very fast to only 18% D3. So what we focused on after the solid core, we wanted to improve the D3, obviously, and make the users remain in the game. We added a basic upgrade system. We noticed that once you added something that kept players, gave them something to do and some targets in the game, that already helped the D3 quite a bit and also increased our D1. But that didn't really solve the problem because players were now spending even more time with the game, but they burned through the content very fast. So they were still churning on D3. So we added more content, we added more units, we added more cosmetic content, but we didn't still see huge increase in D3. And we also messed up the first-time user experience a little bit, so we even lost a little bit of D1 in this space. But we had a lot of content in the game. After that, we really started to think how to utilize that content now. So we added the session control, idle resources, similar things that Adam was talking about. So basically restricting the amount of playtime per sessions and per day. And with the content we now had in the game, we did a huge jump on D3, achieving almost over doubling the D3 at this point. Then we fine-tuned the systems and added even more content and improved the first part of the game. And then found out that it's really hard to move the needle when you hit a certain point, certain ratio of D1, D3. So we were originally targeting 70% D3, D1 ratio. And that is like still up to date, like currently in the game, we haven't been able to climb much past that. After that, we moved our focus to D7 and D30 and those features that affect that. But that's another story. So in the pace of 8 months, we actually, I think the biggest ones that we focused on the early retention, over doubled our D3, and also the playtime almost doubled. So very happy with these results from the game. So key takeaways for us, test each major feature. We didn't do that with the first game that we built and we failed on that. This game, we took another route. Prioritize features based on the predicted impact versus the development time. Very important if you have a small team and limited time. Then focus on core progression systems and soft limits for the players. That made the biggest difference, at least for us. Standardize all your test parameters. However you run your test, make sure that your data is going to stay valid. Use open beta for volume, especially for the smaller companies. I would skip the closed beta and just get it out there as fast as possible. And key learnings, fix your D3, D1 ratio first and then move to consecutive tests to focus more on the longer term retention. And also, purpose of the game content is only fuel the system. So just adding a lot of content without proper timing in the system or content spreading is a waste of time. Cool. Thank you. And next up, now I want to give turn to Ivan. Ivan will be talking about the next steps in the development cycle. So more than how to optimize your game's monetization potential once you're launched.
Thank you very much, Riku. It was an amazing story how we actually were able to build a Battle Legion from Valve prototype to a very promising title. My name is Ivan. Hello, everyone. In contrast to Riku's talk, I'll be focusing on a later stage of improvements. So when your game is already polished, already launched, what can we do to make the most out of it? Like me personally, I can be described by like 2 things. First, a game business analyst. I try to analyze and improve games essentially all my professional life. And as a new parent, where I'm averaging around 8 espresso per day for the last 9 months. So to actually help the games grow, I founded a company called SuperScale. Right now, we're over 70 scalability specialists where we partner with game developers to actually figure out how to make the game more successful. Like I'm based in London, but we have offices around. So to give a bit of a teaser, what we try to show here is a technique we find very promising and could be used in many titles out there. We'll be focusing on changes in an already polished launch game, which actually can move the needle, can bring a significant improvement in tens of percents and 7 figures revenue upwards. And we'll illustrate this technique on a game called Thanks a Lot. Did some of you heard about the game or play the game? Nice. So it's a brawler, but with tanks. So it's a perfect scenario for this kind of improvements. So let's step back a bit. What's kind of a problem we try to solve now? So if we're talking about the game, which already passed this engagement and retention test, and it's launched, every game developer that is in a game as a service business faces the same challenge. The launch is just a beginning of the whole battle, so to speak, as we know that to be successful, we need to actually grow the game for years to come. And as our game is already launched, of course, as the time passes, it gets older, and the market pressure of hundreds of games released every day, it's making a job more difficult to actually grow the game through UA or make it more visible at time. So without a successful process how we keep the game fresh and improving, we'll be having a very hard time to sustain the game for a long time. So if we agree that we need to have a proper way how to improve the games after it's launched, the discussion usually revolves around, should we focus more on engagement, or should we focus more on the monetization? Like, based on my experience and experience of our partners, making huge changes in engagement or retention after the game is already polished and launched, it's a very hard thing to do. Something that would really move the needle in a game which is already finished, it's a very hard job. On the other side, if the game has a good baseline, it's able to retain and entertain the players, the monetization changes are so much easier to design, to execute, and provide immediate results in a baseline. So, if we do agree that having the monetization improvement plan and changes after launch, the question is, of course, how to spot the part of the game we should focus on and improve it. So this is the part that, as Nacho said at the beginning of the presentation, fits into the frame perfectly with the planning, execution, result phase. In the planning phase, identifying what we call lowest hanging fruit analysis. It's something that should help you to figure out where in the game is some hidden potential that I could improve. When you're talking about monetization, the simplest way how to look at this is the LTV, or ARPU, average revenue per user curve over time, and spotting these moments when it kind of flattens or flattens too soon. What does it mean, a curve flattens too soon? Actually, in this case, it means that you already, okay, it can mean two things. Either you don't have any players in the game left, so there is nobody to play and spend it. Of course, that's not really that we can fix with some monetization changes. But if you actually know that you have players in your game that are still engaging, but not spending enough, there's definitely something we can do about. In this example, in this example, in Thanks a Lot, we noticed that between day 30 and day 60, we have still many engaged players and payers who already pay in the first 30 days, but they are not paying or spending anymore. So there was definitely an area we try to focus more. So diving deeper into this segment of flattened LTV curve. In case of Thanks a Lot, as I mentioned, it's a game, it's a brawler, 3v3 tanks battling each other, having guns and turrets. We noticed that power level of upgrading guns, it's probably not significant enough. So after you invest into upgrading those, many players and payers noticed that the outcome isn't as dramatic on the gameplay as it should be, so there was no intention for them to upgrade more. So this is some kind of a hypothesis we went with, that, hey, maybe the reason why we see the LTV curve flattened, that we are not actually offering enough value with the upgrade system of our most used guns. So the way how we approached that was pretty straightforward. You have Excel balance sheets with the power levels upgrade. We made the function a bit more rewarding for our players in the upgrades later on. And considering that, yeah, this is actually a change which we are able to do very cheaply. It was a spreadsheet exercise for about 2 weeks of a game economy team. Implement, again, pretty easy. Put it in the backend, doesn't really require nothing else. And of course, we expect quite a bit of impact from this change. So another part of planning phase is looking for the metrics we'll be actually evaluating our impact. So as we start, it's a monetization change, right? So we start with this LTV or ARPU curve. We see many times that it's still popular method is to look at ARPDAU or ARPDAU change after you do an update on the game and see if your ARPDAU is higher or lower. We found out this method to be a bit misleading. Is that ARPDAU doesn't really capture the dynamic and the long-term effect of a change, especially with the economy, and could be misleading that it doesn't take account into cannibalization of a baseline and stuff like that. The method that we decided that goes in line with monetization improvements, it's focusing on average revenue per user day X. So day 1, 3, 10, or 30 to 60, as we are focusing now, against a control group. So always running it in the sync. And again, you are able to truly evaluate the new economy against the original one in the long run, accounting all the differences we need. So in Thanks a Lot, again, we, as a part of planning, we change the economy. We want to see how does the LTV curve impact it between day 30 and day 60. So going into execution of the test, of course, to draw some conclusions, we need enough payments and enough players for that. Again, this is something that you can compute based on the traffic, based on a conversion between the states. So for example, with Thanks a Lot, we knew that we will need another around 150K players to drive at least to 400 to 500 purchases in each variant to see how it change. We expected the change to be big. We don't like to focus on changes that bring just a few % of revenue. When you expect in tens of percents difference, this should be enough. But again, very important to compute before to see how long you need to run the test and how much traffic you need to drive to. What is very important and something that cannot be understated is that even though I'm an analyst and we talk about data all the time, actually what's behind the data, it's players. So when you do changes to economy, especially something that touches like revenue and monetization, you should be very much aware that it could create some community backlash or some players may, of course, that your player will spot it. So the way how you communicate it, the way how you narrow down the test, the way how you involve your community management, it's very much be crucial for your community not to turn against the game. So definitely very important part of execution. And then results. So fortunately, with this change, we actually observed 25% increase in ARPU day 30, day 60, considering that it was a change, literally a spreadsheet exercise implemented, just changing one progression curve another. The ROI was pretty good. The change was definitely measurable and impactful on the game, but we know that unfortunately it doesn't happen all the time. When you run this kind of a test, you have to expect for all three scenarios. So not just for success, but also it can be inconclusive or it can fail. With inconclusive tests, that you change something, but you don't see any change in any relevant metrics. We observed that at the end, going with the gut, so what will prepare the game for some kind of a next kind of changes is the best for that. So either keeping the change or changing. You know that you're not actually breaking your game on anything. So whatever fits the game vision, it's better. If the test failed, that's another interesting point that especially when the players in the second variant got a different experience than the other players, you need to think about if you cancel the variant that to explain it to players why the experience suddenly changes and maybe reward them with some soft or premium currency and thank them for participation. Again, prevents the community backlash and drive it down. So to put it all together, when we are talking how to get a significant improvement with a polished game, which is already launched, we recommend thinking about how to approach the monetization improvement testing and how to focus on these low-hanging fruit changes that doesn't require too much of a development time, but can bring a big uplift. So as we showed, the game economy changes or that connected special offer exercise. We think that looking at ARPU day X could be useful in this scenario against like ARPDAU metrics or something like that. Within the execution, we definitely had a success of limiting the impact of a change to a certain number of players that we knew that we need to evaluate that, looking at metrics that we were attacking in the first place, so day 3, day 60, and of course working very closely with the community management team to make sure that the community understands what we are trying to achieve, and we won't have backlash from that. And definitely, as soon as you hit the marks that you need to make the action and move forward to the next thing. Thank you very much for your attention. I'm giving back word to our MC, Nacho.
Thank you. Thank you. Yeah. Yeah.
Country meeting points at lunch.
Yeah, thank you very much. Or should I say, like, my joke that I was working for the last 25 minutes, thanks a lot. It was very bad, I know. All right, so let's put all the pieces together for this session. But before doing that, I think both Riku and Ivan were mentioning that we have a number of tools available in the Play console, notably the distribution tracks, that even though that you might be familiar, I wanted to kind of like as a reminder, for running your tests in pre-launch stages, as of today, we have 4 distribution tracks that are extremely useful to do so. So you have the internal app sharing, internal test tracks, up to open testing track, which is what Riku was mentioning, that they have been using for the last 8 months. And they have a number of benefits. They don't have, you will not see any public ratings. All the reviews are private. You will still benefit from all the reporting from the Play console, and you can even run UA campaigns and stuff like that. So that's super important. As well, we see many developers that are using the production track for testing purposes, whether it's full UA in some country, like in Brazil, as we were hearing before. And also helps to build some credibility by ratings. And as well, you can use all the tracks when you are relaunching or you are revamping, launching a new feature of the game. And I truly recommend you to kind of use, for example, the stage rollouts and country stage rollouts. So if you're thinking about launching a new feature that is a game-changing feature, you can use these stage rollouts so you can start rolling out and seeing beforehand how the users are liking it. So putting all together, I'm just coming back to the slide before that we had. So in terms of planning, we've heard a number of things. So think about the metrics that you want to look at some of the benchmarks. Maybe consider if you have some metrics within the game that are declining, and then try to prioritize the features. So we heard about the long-hanging fruit analysis, also faster impact or bigger impact. As well, some developers, they told us they prefer to test things that deliver faster results so they can get the results from the test very quickly. When it comes to execution, I think we've heard across all the speakers, they mentioned that data has to be reliable. And this is super important to take some time, think about the methodology, and how are we going to select the sample. And finally, if we're talking about results, it's always easier to get results in pre-launch games, and that's something like Riku was mentioning. Obviously, you are still in development, and the game has more potential to grow. But always, regardless of the result and the outcome of the test, try to have some key learnings. I think some of the developers, they were telling me only 15% of the tests, they actually have a valid hypothesis, but still the rest, it could be some learnings out of it. And in fact, try always to monitor the long-term metrics focus. Have a long-term metrics focus, excuse me, because we might have very good results in the short term, but what we care is in the end, in the long term, what is the game improving and how is the game is improving.